Okay. So I think most people made it back. If not, they'll probably hear us talking, I hope. So we're gonna continue with our second talk. And so this is my friend Adam. We met in Panama. And we took the tree climbing course together with Joe and with a third student. So we were a really kind of tight group that were up in the trees all the time, doing crazy stuff sometimes. So yeah, I've known Adam for, I don't know, about 7, 8, 9 years.
Yeah, give or take.
Many years now. He used to like live in Georgia, so we'd also go tree climbing in Georgia. It was also a lot of fun. Adam is a scientist, so he focuses on lizards and reptiles. I think mostly lizards, right? Not really sure. Like, yeah. Yeah, my main interaction with him catching animals was like him catching an iguana and an armadillo. So I'm not sure, you know. And both of those times he was like basically in a tree and he would like go down and like. So yeah, he's very good at basically studying animals. Yes, creatures, weird creatures. So without further ado, I'm going to give Adam the floor, and so he can share his screen, and then there's plenty of time probably for questions. I don't know if you want to take questions while you're talking.
I think it's a pretty small group, so we can keep it sort of informal in that way. So sure, if people want to have a burning question and want to interrupt during the talk, feel free. That's not a problem at all. Or you can save your questions till the end. Either way is fine by me.
Okay, great.
Can everybody see my screen okay? Hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, great. Well, thanks very much, everybody, for being here. I'm really excited to share with you some of the work that I've had the pleasure of doing in the canopy, in trees, sort of all over the world. So I've been really privileged. And I, as Grant mentioned, I sort of come at tree climbing from the academic side, from the scientific side. So I'm interested in tree climbing sort of as a tool to get up into the tree canopy where I can find cool animals. And so that's sort of the direction that I come at tree climbing from. And so what I want to do in this talk is share with you 3 individual discoveries that we've made semi-recently related to lizards in forests. And before I do that, I just want to sort of emphasize what we've already sort of been hearing from other folks, is just how amazing the community is, and how much I owe to many people and organizations for giving me the skills and encouraging me to get up into the forest canopy. So the couple people and institutions that I want to acknowledge right off the bat. So Joe Mayer, who's been mentioned a few times. So this is the late great Joe Mayer here on the upper right-hand corner there. So he was my climbing instructor in Panama at ITEC, the Institute for Tropical Ecology and Conservation. And so without Joe and without ITEC, I would not be able to present any of the results that I'm presenting to you today. So I owe them a huge debt of gratitude, but certainly not just them. So, you know, obviously Griette and Jody were my climbing sort of co-partners when we were learning how to climb together in Panama. After returning to the States, Bill Maher and Jeff Newman were really instrumental and very generous in sharing their climbing knowledge and expertise with me freely. And so I owe all of these folks a huge debt of gratitude, and without them, none of what I'm talking about would have been possible. So big thanks. Okay, so without further ado, let me jump right into this. So like I said, I'm going to sort of be presenting three sort of semi-separate little vignettes of discovery related to lizards in the forest canopy. And my sort of central motivation behind a lot of this work is conservation, learning more about how we better protect biodiversity on our planet, learning more about the natural history of these organisms, because the canopy, as many of you know, is sort of this frontier for discovery, this frontier for exploration. There's still so much we don't know. There's still so much that we can discover just sort of serendipitously without really trying. Just sort of up in the canopy and you find cool things. So I want to sort of highlight a couple of those stories. And then the final story I want to highlight is a little bit more on the conservation side. So talking about how these discoveries relate to people and how we can help people's livelihoods, improve people's livelihoods, and actually sort of foment and encourage on the ground, boots on the ground conservation, and what that looks like, at least from my perspective and some of the work I've been privileged to do. Okay, so story number one, discovery number one. So this is sort of, again, sort of this incidental finding that was not what we were expecting, was not what we were looking for, but it was something that was very interesting, and was very thrilling in the moment. So this story starts in the Sierra de los Tuxtlas. This is an isolated cluster of volcanoes on the coast of Mexico here. And so it's a really interesting habitat. As I mentioned, it's pretty isolated. So you sort of got lowland areas and then sort of this cluster of volcanoes that sprouts up along the coast. And so on the upper photograph there, you can see Volcano San Martin Tuxtla. So it's one of two really large volcanoes, and then there's a whole series of smaller rounded volcanic cones. There's quite a bit of deforestation that's unfortunately occurred in the area, but there are still very large remnants of sort of this lower montane tropical rainforest. The trees are often quite large, 30, 40, 45 meters in height. And they're generally really heavily loaded with epiphytes. So things like bromeliads, ferns, mosses, orchids, just form these dense mats of epiphytic vegetation that grows on the trees, in the trees. And so it's this habitat that's been very poorly explored herpetologically in terms of reptiles and amphibians. And so we visited to try and rediscover a species of lizard that had not been seen for a few decades. We were unsuccessful in that particular attempt, but we did find something else that was very cool and very unexpected. So we were up about 25 meters high in this tree, and I was poking around in this moss mat on this branch here, shown in the photograph on the left. And this little skink came popping out of the moss, and it surprised me so much that I almost let it get away. It almost got away from me, but I finally got it in my hands. And so bizarrely, this is a group that's known as the ground skinks. So these are animals that by and large are only found generally in leaf litter. There's a few records of them climbing, 1 or 2 meters high on tree trunks and shrubs. But here is this skink 25 meters high in the forest canopy. So just a bizarre place to be finding this animal. These are critters that are sort of widely distributed throughout parts of the southeastern United States, down into Mexico, into Guatemala, parts of El Salvador, Honduras. And all those places, they're basically found on the ground. So it was very interesting and bizarre to find this one in a tree. So we published a little note on it in the hope that it would stimulate other people to think a little bit more broadly about where these animals occur. And it just sort of helps to exemplify, as I mentioned, just the bizarre serendipitous things that you can find when you're climbing up in the tree canopy. And I'd be interested to know if this actually happens in the US as well. So at the end of the talk, I'd be interested to hear if other people are seeing skinks maybe that look like this elsewhere in the US when they're climbing trees, especially for like the rendezvous next year when you're climbing up in those oaks. This group of lizards lives in that area. So it'd be interesting to know if people end up finding them up in the canopy next year. So that's discovery number one. Discovery number two is a little bit more on the conservation side. So as everybody knows, sort of extinction and biodiversity loss is a big ongoing problem in the world today. The dodo illustrated here is sort of one of these poster childs for extinction. And it's sort of this, to an extent, this doom and gloom story that I find really, really depressing. And I think it's important to also mention these success stories when scientists figure out that, something that we thought was extinct or gone may actually not be gone. We may have been wrong in sort of calling something extinct a little bit prematurely. And so this happens surprisingly often. So there was a recent review study about 5 or so years ago that found that basically two to three times a year on average, scientists are finding some species of vertebrate, whether it's a bird or a lizard, or a snake or a frog that was previously considered to be extinct, which actually is not extinct. And so I think it's really important to highlight these sort of success stories, because otherwise it just becomes this doom and gloom narrative that I don't think accurately captures what people are doing to try and sort of combat this biodiversity crisis. So one little contribution on this along these lines. So this one takes place in Fiji. And so you might be asking, well, where on earth is Fiji? So it's this highly isolated group of islands. It's an archipelago. So you can see the USA mainland up on the upper right-hand side there. Hawaii is the island almost in the center of your screen. And then the Fiji Islands are much farther to the south and west. And so from Los Angeles, California, it's about an 11-hour direct flight to get to Fiji. It's a little bit closer from Australia, maybe 3.5, 4 hours to get to Fiji. So a very isolated group of islands. And in part due to that isolation, the biology of the forest canopy there is very poorly known, sort of the consistent story that you'll hear over and over from me today. And so this is what the Fiji Islands look like once you sort of zoom in on them. So it's as I mentioned, an archipelago of about 300 islands. But the two main islands are Viti Levu, sort of in the lower right, and then Vanuatu, a little bit higher, farther to the north and east. And so this story focuses on Vanuatu here. And so most of the population in Fiji is concentrated on these two islands, and they're sort of the most sort of biologically impoverished in a way. So there's been a lot of things that have been done to the biodiversity on these two main islands that have been problematic. And one of the critters, and sort of the focus of this story is this animal. So this is the Fiji barred tree skink. And so this is an animal that's known from quite a few of the islands in Fiji, at least historically. But there was a paper written in 1986, which incidentally was a year before I was born, in which Walter Brown and John Gibbons, who are two of the leading authorities on lizards in the Fiji Islands, wrote in this paper that this species, the Fiji barred tree skink, is almost certainly extinct on the main islands of Viti Levu and Vanuatu. So again, these two large islands in the background here. And so they made this claim in part because of the repeated introduction of multiple non-native species to those two main islands, namely the mongoose. So for those of you who aren't familiar with mongoose, they're sort of like this weasel or ferret that is very good at capturing, killing, and eating small birds, small lizards. And they've been considered responsible for a lot of either island extinctions or complete extinctions of entire species from various island systems, not only in Fiji, but elsewhere in the world. So the fact that there were mongooses present on both of these main islands, together with a lot of deforestation, is what led Brown and Gibbons to make this claim. So for the next 30 years, after they wrote this paper, this was sort of accepted as the conventional wisdom by the scientific community regarding the status of this Fiji barred tree skink on these two main islands. And so we found something contrary to that. So when we were on Vanuatu looking for a different group of lizards, so iguanas, up in the forest canopy, the very last day, the very last tree of the expedition that we climbed, and I should say it was actually I'm kind of proud of this, our local guide, we trained to climb trees during the trip. And so it was actually him, his name is Aporoso Rokobala. He was actually up in this tree, 16 meters high in the canopy, and he caught this beautiful Fiji barred tree skink on Vanuatu. So we were all very excited, jumping up as soon as he brought it down out of the canopy. He called down that he found a very large lizard in the canopy. And so we sort of knew in that moment that he'd found something very cool. He didn't know what it was at the time, but as soon as he brought it down from the canopy and met us on the ground, we all just sort of jumped up and down, screaming and hugging at the base of this tree. So it's a very exciting moment. And so we published this finding in a short paper, sort of reviewing these sort of cases where things were prematurely considered extinct in Fiji. So this is something that the scientific community has not done a terribly good job of sort of being able to make these calls of when things are extinct or not in Fiji. So this is sort of one example of several that we sort of reviewed in this paper. So a bit of good news here, which was fun to sort of contribute to. But there's also this interesting twist to the story. So it turns out that when you look at the literature, which we did over the course of researching this paper, we found that contrary to that previous claim by Brown and Gibbons back in 1986, there actually have never been, up until this discovery, any vouchered records of Fiji barred tree skink on either of the two main islands. So it wasn't that we rediscovered this species in a place where it was thought to be extinct. It actually turns out that nobody had ever found it on Vanuatu before. so sort of mistakes compounding on mistakes. So, scientists are human and certainly fallible as all of us are. So another sort of thing that I just wanted to emphasize, that science is this sort of, over time, it's this self-correcting process where we learn that mistakes have happened, and sometimes it takes 30 years for us to figure out that a mistake has happened, but eventually science tends to correct those mistakes. So it was fun to discover, not rediscover, this species, and indicate that it is definitely not extinct on this island in Fiji. So a very exciting discovery in that regard. So again, two sort of quick little vignettes there. And then for the rest of the talk, I want to focus on this third project, which is something sort of a new direction for me, in the sense that it's taxonomy, so the science of describing and naming a new species. So this is something that I had dreamed about ever since I was a kid doing. And last year, we finally published this description of this new lizard species from Mexico, which was very exciting and sort of this childhood dream come true for me. But more than that, it was an opportunity to work with really just an incredible group of colleagues and collaborators in Mexico who are very dedicated to conservation, and then local communities who support this lizard. And just being able to work with them and just sort of feed off of their energy and excitement and interest in this lizard, and how we can sort of leverage this lizard, hopefully in the coming years, to help increase sort of the sustainability of this community and sort of their livelihoods moving forward. So that's the story that I want to tell for the next 15, 20 minutes or so. So before I get into that story, I want to give you a little bit of a primer on this particular group of lizards. So they are called the Arboreal Alligator lizards in English, but because that is such a mouthful, what I'm going to do is I'm going to refer to them by their genus name for this talk. So the genus is Abronia. So what are Abronia? So it's about 41 recognized species currently. They're distributed throughout most of Central America. So it's from sort of central Mexico, south into eastern Panama, through the Central American region. Many, but certainly not all of the species, are fully arboreal. So they're spending virtually all of their time up in the forest canopy. And because that habitat is so inaccessible to most scientists, and particularly to most lizard biologists, this is sort of a group of lizards that's considered very mysterious, very enigmatic, very poorly known. There are many species that are only known from a single mountain or a single group of mountains. Some are only known from a single specimen to science. And so it's a group that, because of that, and because of the fact that they live in these cloud forest habitats primarily, which are under severe threat from deforestation from various causes, not only are these very mysterious and sort of enigmatic lizards, but they're also highly imperiled, highly endangered globally. And so there's a lot of interest in figuring out how we can best protect them. But before we do that, we actually need to know how many species there actually are. And so because they're so difficult to find, because they're so difficult to catch, there are still new species, undescribed species within this group that are out there waiting to be found. And so what I want to do next is show you a map of where these animals are distributed. So this by no means shows all the Abronia that exists. This is just sort of a snapshot of some of the species. And there's a lot going on this map. So I just want to break this down for you and call out a few sort of key takeaways for this map. So the land surface here, what we're looking at is the different colors represent different elevations. So the cooler colors, the blues and greens, indicate lower elevation regions, whereas the sort of pale creamy yellow to the darker red areas indicate high elevation areas on the map. And then the individual dots, again, don't worry too much about all the individual colors and shapes, but basically each one of those dots indicates a place where we know that at least one species of Abronia lives. So they're individual localities for where we know Abronia occur. And so the different colors and different shapes just indicate the different species. So a couple of the takeaways here. One, I want you to notice that most of those dots, or virtually all of those dots, are in the highland areas. So again, that sort of reemphasizes what I mentioned earlier, that these are animals that are restricted to the mountains primarily. The other thing I want you to notice is that for a lot of these species, there's very few dots on the map. So again, they're often highly restricted in their geographic distribution, and they're often highly enigmatic, where we know very little about them, and they're often known from just a single small area. And then the third thing I want you to take away from this map is that there are still quite a few gaps where there are mountains, but there are no Abronia observations yet, at least from the scientific community. And so I especially want to call your attention to one of these gaps in particular. So in this black rectangle here. So this black rectangle is sort of encompassing this narrow spine of mountains that are called the Sierra Madre de Chapas in southern Mexico, in the state of Chiapas. And so in between that red triangle on the upper left, which represents the only known locality for a species called Abronia ramirezi, and then in the lower right-hand corner, those green circles represent populations of a species called Abronia smithi. Between those two, we don't know what's going on. There are no records scientifically, and it's sort of this blank spot on the map that we just have no idea what's going on. So this is where the story sort of starts to get interesting. So when I was still at the University of Georgia, just finishing up my PhD there, and for my dissertation, I'd sort of been focusing on, at least for a couple chapters, on the ecology and conservation of Abronia. So I sort of knew a little bit about them at the time. A colleague in Mexico sent me this really interesting photo, one of a series of photos, in August of 2017. And he wanted to know what I thought. And when I saw these photos, my eyes got as big as dinner plates because this critter looked like nothing else that we'd ever seen in the scientific community in terms of an Abronia. And so I said, where on earth did you find this? And he said, well, we found it here in this gap. And so specifically in a community called the Ejido Sierra Morena. So Ejido basically refers to a community in Spanish, or in Mexico. And most interestingly, this community and this locality where he found this lizard was in a federally protected area known as the La Sepultura Biosphere Reserve. So sort of compounding the conservation importance of this discovery, being able to learn more about biodiversity in a protected area was really interesting. So you can't scientifically, at least most scientists discourage trying to describe new species solely based off of the photo of a single individual. And so what we needed to do at that point was put together an expedition to try and find additional individuals of this lizard and confirm that it was indeed new and better describe its variation. So with a lot of support from a lot of different groups, we were able to put together 2 trips. So one in the summer of 2018 and one in the summer of 2019. Involving international teams of folks from Mexico, from Spain, students from the US as well, and then local community members from Sierra Morena to guide us and show us around and inform us on how to actually go about looking for this lizard. And so these were highly rewarding field trips. I enjoyed them immensely. Being able to interact with people and sort of share experiences was just absolutely phenomenal. And so it's a very difficult place to reach. So it's about a 2.5-hour drive down a dirt road before you get to the community at the base of these mountains, where the road ends. And from there, it's another 1.5-hour, 2-hour hike to get up to this ridge line, very steep slopes, which is where the lizards actually live. And so this sort of helps to emphasize why it took so long for this lizard to sort of become known to the scientific community, because it's in this very remote, very difficult to access forest. And interestingly enough, the community at the base of the mountain, Ejido Sierra Morena, those folks were unfamiliar with this lizard as well, just sort of emphasizing how secretive they are, how enigmatic they are. So this was something that was truly unknown to everybody, not just scientists, which was pretty unusual. And so it is a true cloud forest at this elevation. So every afternoon, the clouds roll up from the Pacific Ocean and just sort of saturate this forest. And so it's just this remarkable prehistoric sort of forest with the trees are sort of stunted. So anywhere from 15 to 20 meters tall. So not very tall trees, and they're just absolutely loaded, much like the Sierra de los Tuxtlas, which I mentioned earlier, just loaded with epiphytic growth. So huge bromeliads, clusters of moss, orchids, ferns, you name it. You can almost find any type of plant you can think of growing on the branches of these trees. So a very interesting place to work and a very difficult place to look for lizards because there's so many places for them to hide. So the advantage with the trees being so short is that we really didn't have to use ropes at all to climb these trees. It was really just free climbing. And we relied in huge part on this particular man. So this is Roberto Martinez Padilla, who lives in the Ejido Sierra Morena. And he was just a fantastic, even in the big clunky rubber boots, he was a fantastic free climber of these trees. And so he alone actually, not only was he good at climbing these trees, but he very, very quickly picked up how to find these Abronia in the trees. So he found almost half of the lizards that we were eventually able to capture. So with a lot of luck and a lot of effort, and with the help of Robert Tony, we were eventually able to capture 7 individuals of that new species of lizard, and were able to very quickly confirm that it was in fact a new species. So we named it the Sierra Morena Arboreal Alligator Lizard, or Abronia morenica, in part to honor the community who supported us in so many ways with this. Name also honors the sort of the appearance of this species, because moreno is a term in Spanish that often means brown-skinned or dark-skinned. And because this lizard has this semi-unusual brown color pattern on its back, sort of a joint meaning behind the name, honoring the community and then honoring the lizard itself as well. So we published this description, as I mentioned, last year, which was sort of this dream come true for me. And then just to sort of show you some of the why we decided that it was something new, it just looks very, very different. So again, this is Abronia ramirezi and Abronia smithi in the 2 inset photos here, which are the 2 nearest species that occur close to Abronia morenica. And so Abronia ramirezi, among many other features, has these very distinct, broad, dark bands on the back, which Abronia morenica typically lacks or has very indistinct bands. And then Abronia smithi is the species that's typically bright green. Morenica is never green. And smithi also has these remarkable horn-like, spine-like scales above the ears, which Abronia morenica lacks. So we also have genomic data to support the distinctiveness of this new species, but morphologically, it's also very clearly something quite different. Okay, so this is all great. So we've described this new species, we've announced this new species to the world. But sort of, so what, right? What does this actually mean for conservation? How can we leverage this for conservation? And what does that sort of look like? And how do we communicate that to the community of people who live and work in this area? And so we've instituted, with, again, working closely with these local communities, sort of a multifaceted outreach campaign to increase knowledge and awareness of this new critter, because, as I mentioned, even the community that lives right at the base of the mountain where this lizard occurs, they were unfamiliar with it due to its secretive behavior. So a couple of the things that we've done were to produce these educational posters, which we have printed and distributed to the communities, and also to the staff of the Biosphere Reserve, which sort of encompasses this new locality and new species. So that's been very helpful and very well received. We've done several outreach events with live individuals of Abronia morenica to show them to both community leaders of the ejido and also to the kids and young folks who will be sort of the next leaders of the community moving forward, so they can understand that this is not a dangerous species, that it's a harmless animal, to emphasize the point that they are the only community in the world that protects this species. And so trying to emphasize that source of pride for them, and they bought into that message very, very quickly. And so this is a second outreach event that we did with them. Again, you can see some of the posters that we've shared, and then also showing the only baby that has ever been found of the new species. So showing that to them as well. And then, because describing a new species, it takes some time. So, between our first visit in the summer of 2018 and the species description officially being published a little over 2 years later, there's a lot that can go on during that time. And so we wanted to keep the community and keep the Biosphere Reserve staff up to date on what we were doing in the interim in a more prompt way. So we wrote a couple of reports in Spanish for them to update them on the findings of our field work on the 2 trips that we made, to emphasize again in writing our perceived importance of this species and what it could potentially mean to the community moving forward. And then we also wanted to do some technical training for the reserve staff, which includes this really exciting community science effort that the reserve has been spearheading for about the last 4 years or so, to actually train local community members in, I think, 7 different communities across this reserve to monitor their local biodiversity and understand more what species occur in their area, in the forest that they support. And so we did a training event illustrating how to identify this new species relative to other species of lizards that it could be confused with. And again, communicating directly with them the importance of understanding better the distribution of this species, its ecology, where it occurs, and, emphasizing that it's not dangerous, and emphasizing again that this is the only place on Earth where this critter is known to occur. So it's very, very exciting. And again, this was a message that was very well received by those folks. And then when the official species description was released, we did a press conference in the capital of Chapas, which was very well attended by sort of local and statewide media. And so the message here was that we really wanted people to be aware more broadly of this lizard discovery and hopefully visit Sierra Morena to sort of support the community with tourism dollars, because they do have this sort of budding ecotourism center that we would really like to see more people visit. So again, this is something that's sort of not sort of just getting off the ground. It's been around for 5 or 6 years now. And they're not receiving a whole lot of visitation, and obviously the pandemic has stalled things out, understandably, but we're hopeful that during the coming years, as people start to do international travel again, that people will consider visiting Sierra Morena, not only to find the arboreal alligator lizard, the Abronia, but also to see just the other remarkable organisms that inhabit this forest. So there are jaguars there are spider monkeys, peccaries, quetzals, toucans, you name it. This cloud forest sort of has it all. And so if folks in the audience have Spanish speaking ability, at least to some degree, I would encourage you to consider visiting the Centro Ecoturistico Sierra Morena at some point in the future. The folks there are very, very committed to sustainability, very committed to protecting their local biodiversity. I would like to, as a shameless plug, just support them as much as I can moving forward. And hopefully you can support them as well.
Is it necessary to speak Spanish when you go there?
So the folks who are there don't speak much English. So if you do only speak a non-Spanish language, it could be a little bit challenging. But if if that sense of adventure isn't something that bothers you,
right.
they can make it work. And if you can make it work, they can make it work. So
yeah. Yes, nice. Hands and feet.
Yes.
Yes.
And so that's all I have. So I just want to acknowledge on this slide, I'm not going to be able to have time to name everybody here, but again, this is a huge team effort for all the 3 little pieces of research that I've been able to share with you over the last half hour or so. Many funders, many people assisted in the field, many people providing permission to access land, to publish the results off of their land. And so I'm hugely indebted to all of these folks. And just want to emphasize again that science is not this individual thing. This is a process that involves a lot of people and a lot of community members. And to me, that's part of the fun and part of the joy of being able to do this type of work. So thank you to everybody, and thank you all for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Adam. That's very awesome. Yes. All right. So if people in the audience have any questions, you can unmute yourself. I don't know if you can. Okay, go ahead.
Adam, that was a really exciting talk in terms of scientific discoveries and such. It's to actually speak and hear a presentation about refinding extinct species and such. It's very, very exciting. My first question is a practical one. Could I grab your email or vice versa, so that I can maybe get some of those details that I could share on our platforms, because a lot of people are interested in these places that they can go and experience real forest and the not so tourist version, but also the not fatal travel experiences. I would love to share some of that. That would be great. I think people would be very, very interested. The other question was more a personal question, and because not from so much experience, but how do you overcome the frustrations of working in the academic world, where it can sometimes everything takes a bit longer and to get to where you're going? So the work that you've done has been just so incredible, but it does take years to get results and to get results out. What I mean, how do you keep going, for one? And also, what would you say to kind of up and coming canopy researchers, or just researchers in general, going into this process that kind of, I guess that they're kind of wanting, this is the impression I get when I work with them, is that they want to save the world today. And then they realize they can't climb 17 trees in a day. Sure. And that they're not, that's not a bad thing. But, you know, yeah, those kind of two questions.
Yeah, so just as a really quick answer to your first question, so my email address is here at the bottom of this slide here. So you or anyone else who's viewing, feel free to send me an email about any of this work, or if you have any questions, I'm always happy to answer emails. And if down the line someone wants to visit some of these places, I'm happy to help facilitate that in whatever way that I can. Regarding your second question, I think one of the things that I always try and keep in mind is that, and I think this is a quote that I've probably stolen from somebody, but I've just sort of internalized it as something that I think about a lot. And that is that anything that's really worth doing in the world usually isn't something that's easy or something that happens overnight. These are things that take time, whether you're in the academic environment or in the practitioner environment, inside academia, outside academia. Important things, generally speaking, are not things that happen overnight. And so I think it's important to sort of remember that and try and just have that sort of internal patience and realize that, yes, it's going to be sort of a long road. And yes, it's going to be something that's, going to take a few years. But as long as you keep plodding at it and keep making that progress, eventually things are going to come out okay in the end. And that's been something that, at least at a personal level for me, has been really helpful in sort of keeping me going with this work. Because you're right. I mean, as I mentioned, between the first expedition that we were able to put together to visit Sierra Morena and the actual official description and announcement of this new species, that was over a 2-year process. And it's one of those things that now that I've done it once, it's going to be easier moving forward. So this is not, as I mentioned, there's multiple new species of Abronia that need to be described. We were actually just in Mexico last month, finding a couple of additional new ones. And so those, having done it once now, it's going to be easier the second and third time around. So, that's the other thing that I would say to sort of keep people encouraged, is that once you have that experience under your belt, it gets easier moving forward. It gets faster. And so don't be discouraged that it's always going to take this long to get something concrete done and out.
I think that's good. Yeah, what I wanted to say as well, that I think it's important for like scientists and other folks, like people climbing trees, to kind of like communicate with scientists back and forth, like how you can do this in a more kind of effective, efficient way. Sometimes feel like there's a miscommunication and scientists actually don't know that they can go tree climbing and how to do that. And there are lots of people who know how to do that can help them. And so things kind of stall and go slower than is actually necessary sometimes. Yeah.
So I hope I answered your two questions. They're both excellent questions.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect, because sometimes I just don't have the energy, and I'm like, because it just takes that long, okay? Yeah. That's not very helpful to someone that's, getting frustrated, because the passion is there, but they haven't quite got the experience or the foresight. So
Important things take time. That's my message.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, great. Thank you for that.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions from someone else, perhaps?
Can I have some question?
Yeah.
So thanks, Adam. Your presentation makes me inspired to me find some lizard if I have a chance. But unfortunately, I never seen lizard on the tree so far. So if you give me some little hint or some information about like what kind of trees and weather condition that I can find the lizard, then it'll be helpful.
Sure. No, that's a great question. So for reptiles in general, so lizards and also snakes. So there are, to the best of our knowledge, there are probably undescribed snakes, or at least snakes that we don't know live in the canopy that actually do. So in terms of reptile discoveries, lizards and snakes, the best conditions to be finding them in the trees are normally going to be more warmer, sunnier days, because they do need to bask to raise their body temperatures up to the point where they can be active normally. So warm, sunny days are definitely going to be the best for reptiles. The other side of herpetology, so that's the study of reptiles and amphibians, that I did not mention is the amphibian side. And so there are a tremendous number of amphibian discoveries that are left to be made in the forest canopy worldwide. And I think especially in Korea, that might be the more tractable, accessible discoveries to be made there, because your amphibian diversity tends to be a little bit higher than your reptile diversity in the Korean area. And so for them, you're really just sort of looking for, if you can find moss mats or epiphytic growth or tree cavities, those are going to be places where you're going to be more likely to find amphibians. In terms of seasonality, being able to look during the wet season or immediately after a rain, that's also going to be the best time to be looking for amphibians in the tree canopy, because they need that moisture. They dry out really easily, and so having recent rainfall can bring them out where it's easier to find them. But it is hard. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, these, as I mentioned, the first two discoveries, the skink and the Los Tuxtlas up in the canopy, the ground skink, and then the Fiji barred tree skink in Fiji. Those we were looking for other things, and we did not find what we were looking for. So it's difficult. But I think just being able to spend time up in the canopy, and especially with everyone on this call, with the amount of time that folks spend in trees, it gives you that chance to find something unexpectedly. And I think that might be more what you have to hang your hat on, rather than sort of saying to yourself, well, I'm going to go out and climb 5 trees today and find a reptile. That may not be the most encouraging way to go about it, because chances are you're not going to go out that day and find a reptile. It's going to be something that just sort of pops out at you when you may not be expecting it. But give it a try. I mean, give it a try. I love being proved wrong about things like that. So I encourage you to look.
Right.
Adam, I have a question for you. You did mention Florida, and are you planning to come to the rendezvous, or is there anything we can do to help you out from the rendezvous? Like, you want to send us a homework or something to collaborate with you?
My situation at the moment is a little bit uncertain, so I'm not. I can't commit to coming quite yet. Mm-hmm. I'm hopeful that I may be able to attend, but I'm not sure at the moment. In terms of what attendees could look for, if you just happen to find a lizard or a reptile or a frog or a salamander while you're climbing, I would love to hear about that. Shoot me an email. That would just be a load of fun.
So take photos and
yep.
Video if we can, and communicate.
Sure. Video would be great. If you have the ability to take a GPS coordinate, most smartphones now have that ability to record that. Mm-hmm. So that I can learn after the fact where exactly you found it, without it being like the biggest oak tree 5 miles from the trail's end and blah blah like that. GPS coordinates are helpful in that regard.
Okay.
But yes, at a minimum, a photo, if you can, would be great. Recognizing, of course, that lizards they can be fast scurriers, so photos may not be possible. But even if I just hear a story of somebody who found a lizard in a tree, that would be really cool.
Okay, well, good. And I enjoy your presentation, and I'm delighted to think that after I'm done with all of this, which is going to take a lot of work to finish preparing for the rendezvous, but after that, since I am bilingual, I like the idea of being able to help both, with tree climbing and also being able to speak Spanish. So that would be a very good use of some of my, don't want to call it talents, but some of things I know how to do.
Right.
Yes, if you're interested in visiting Sierra Morena, we would love to have you.
I keep that in mind.
Right. Yeah, I think you should just like write a little pamphlet on like tips for tree climbing citizen scientists. What to do. Yeah, I think we're probably all like finding a lot of creatures. I know I never saw anything in the canopy until I met you. And now, yeah, now when I go up, I see things all of a sudden because you kind of like taught me how to see things and how to spot things, you know?
Wow. You know, that if you can make it to the rendezvous next year, Adam, I would love to have you have a workshop on that. And for people who want to learn how to find things, that would be, I would totally give you a primo spot for a workshop.
Well, I appreciate that very much. Yes, again, depending on my availability and employment situations and all these sorts of things, that would be potentially very exciting.
So you're currently a postdoc in LA County?
Correct. Yes, I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Natural History Museum of LA County.
Okay.
I'm here through November, at least guaranteed, and after that, I'm not sure. So this is sort of the application season for additional jobs on the academic market, and so depending on how people view the applications they'll be sending out over the next few months, I don't know where I will be, but
yeah,
it could change. But sort of that uncertainty is just sort of something that you have to expect at this stage of the academic career, as Briette knows. So it's just
Yeah.
Well, good luck with that. I hope you get what you applied for.
Thanks. I'm sure it'll all work out in the end. Yeah.
It will. Yeah. So I kind of have a question, and like you cannot estimate this, but if you would have to estimate like how many reptilian species we do not know about because we don't go into the trees, like what do you kind of think? Or percentage wise, like how much more is there to discover? Because you kind of know how many people, because there must be other people, right, that study reptiles and they go into the trees. I hope you're not the only one. Let's put it that way. So how much is there still to be discovered in that kind of area? Or maybe just like lizards, like what you're focusing on?
That's a really great question, and it's a question that's really difficult to answer. It's one of those sort of unknown unknowns where we don't really have enough data right now to even make an estimate of how many species are left, new species are left to be discovered that spend most of their time in the canopy, how many things like the ground skink that we traditionally think of as being fully ground dwelling actually go up into the trees at some frequency. It's sort of a black box at this point. So I'm certainly by no means the only person who's interested in reptiles and amphibians who climbs into the canopy, but there are not many of us. So it's certainly an area that's it has not received the attention that it deserves. And this is something that we've sort of known for the last 20, 30 years. This is not a new lesson among the scientific community. I think it's, if I had to hazard a guess as to why it's still understudied all these decades later, it's because I think there's not enough scientists who realize how relatively easy it is to get up into the canopy.
Right.
So I think if there was more of that sort of collaboration and understanding between, and a stronger linkage perhaps between the recreational tree climbing community and the academic community, I think we could start to open some of those doors and get more people in trees looking for critters. Yep.
Right. That would be nice. Are there any other questions? I mean, I had so many questions during the talk in my mind, and I would be like, wait, why do people not know that these guys live in the trees? Wait, how does he know this is another species? And then you would kind of answer them on the way. So they disappeared, the questions. Or I was like, did he do some genetic testing? And yes, he did. So yeah, like great research, really thorough, I would say, very dependable, your work. So yeah, really awesome. I hope you do get to connect a lot more scientists with like the canopy for whatever reason, whatever their study species is. Because yeah, there's so much more to be discovered. Definitely. Are there any other questions? Oh yeah, I would still love to go with you to Fiji.
What about Mexico, Griet? That's going to be,
Oh, Mexico, yes. When is this?
well, perhaps next year.
Okay, let's shoot for that. Let's shoot for that. Any other questions? No? Okay, then I suggest we thank Adam. So thank you very much. It was a very nice talk. I'm gonna post it everywhere on the internet. So all these almost 200 camp outs will know about it. And I suggest we take like a short break again, about 5 minutes. And then we'll be back, and then I will give the last talk for this session. Okay?
I appreciate it.
Thank you.